Muy buenos días a todos y todas.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Ryan Berg, and I'm the director of the CSIS Americas program and director of the Future of Venezuela initiative here for the institution. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation with Juan Guaidó, interim president of Venezuela. Before we begin, let me talk about some logistics. This event will last approximately 60 minutes, and today we will have simultaneous interpretation in English through Zoom. In your screen at the bottom, you can see a globe button that says interpretation, and then you can select the language of your choice.
Is happening through Zoom. Please use your mobile phone and a set of earphones. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, please click the globe button that says interpretation, and then select the language you wish to listen in. Después del evento, una grabación estará disponible en la página web del evento. De nuevo, gracias por acompañarnos. Venezuela sigue sumida en una crisis económica, política.
Thank you for being here. Venezuela remains gripped by an unprecedented economic, political, and humanitarian crisis. More than 7 million people have fled the country, marking the largest ongoing mass migration event outside of an active military conflict. A majority of the country lives in poverty, while criminal groups continue to work hand in glove with state actors to profit from illicit economies such as mining and narcotics. The Maduro regime continues persecuting activists and violates human rights with impunity while maintaining almost 300 political prisoners as a warning to anyone who would dare voice dissent. Against this backdrop, and with presidential elections currently scheduled in 2024, it's essential that the international community keeps paying attention to Venezuela. To be able to talk a little bit more about the struggle for a democratic transition in Venezuela, is a real honor for all of us to welcome Juan Guaidó, former interim president of Venezuela. Mr. Guaidó is one of the most important leaders for democracy in Venezuela. He was one of the founders of the Venezuelan student movement. His efforts played a key role in opposing efforts by the government of Hugo Chavez to subvert the constitution and erode checks on government power. Following these efforts, he helped found the Voluntad Popular Party in 2009, which continues to play a prominent role in the Venezuelan opposition. In January of 2019, Guaidó was sworn in as a president of the National Assembly of Venezuela. Subsequently, he was recognized as President of the Republic due to the lack of a legitimate presidency under the Venezuelan Constitution. His appointment was recognized by the United States and nearly 60 other countries. Mr. Guaidó, welcome.
También quiero presentar a nuestro
I also want to introduce Christopher Hernandez Roy, which works here for CSIS, and he has more than 25 years of career, and he has worked extensively to advance democratic governance, prevent and resolve conflicts, strengthening the rule of law, and respect for human rights. He has held various senior leadership positions at the Organization of American States, having served as a senior political advisor to 2 secretaries, where he co-led the organization's efforts to hold the Venezuelan regime accountable for possible crimes against humanity. Chris, welcome. We are going to start with the elections. In anticipation of the upcoming elections that should be scheduled in 2024, which are the commitments from Maduro to improve the electoral conditions? Do you think that this would be just elections or fair elections? And if not, what is that the opposition should do? First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And we're going to continue now. Well, the free and just election is the main demand that we have since 2017 to solve the conflicts. Today, there's a dictatorship, and you described that very well. Sometimes, well, each of us Venezuelans that come to this country is far away from democracy, and we feel that in Caracas, in Venezuela, people are left alone there, and we could list all the elements that could make Venezuela better. Free press, liberation of political prisoners. And I'm here today because I'm talking about Maduro not willing to do anything about this struggle. But we want to transform this election in a free election. And there's a concept, which is the stunning election. We are not even, we are in dictatorship. We want to open the registration for 2 million people that have not been able to register in school at a national level. Angel, he's from Puerto Rico, and he has to drive 4 hours to be able to register for school. And the European Union has some very specific points, but we need to look for the right incentives so that in 2024 we can transform these elections and are competitive and avoid the persecution of political leadership. And that's what I'm doing here today. I'm trying to get protection for the people that are in ground right now. And it's very difficult, not only in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Russia, in Uganda, and it's essential to be able to protect the frontliners, and that's my role here today. And I hope that with the pressure that we can all do, then Andres Velasquez, Solorzano, Freddy, all of them can be in the country without any obstruction. So if Maduro wants to do something against, we can transform the elections and we can solve the conflict in Venezuela. And talking about this electoral problem, President, one problem that we've had in the past is to be able to have an unanimous elections. In October, we have the primaries. And how do you see this and the chances that we can have one candidate? And is this process from the primaries can generate a new generation of leaders to renew efforts to be able to achieve democracy in Venezuela? Well, currently we have dictatorship, and I'm being persecuted again. So the first thing to be able to understand that this is a dictatorship and that there's not going to be equal battles. Right now, I'm here and there's some people that are tortured in Venezuela right now. So this is opportunity for teachers that are protesting because they make $5 per month. In the Wilson Center, I'm saying that imagine to live today, just one day, with $5. And imagine that the teachers in Venezuela make $5 per month. So just because they're protesting in Venezuela, people think that they are not protesting in Venezuela, but they are. So the primary would be what we did in 2012 and 13 to achieve unity. And that's what we did. And electorally, we won over Maduro. In 2016, when we decided to do it, in 2017, when we were on the streets, in 2018, when we had presidential elections in 2019 when we supported the interim government. What I'm trying to say is that we've had achieved often in Venezuela to have unity, electoral unity, and very strong. We've had difficult moments because there are people that are in prison. I see Eric, I see Lester, Carlos, Marcos today. They're here because they're persecuted, not because we didn't want to meet in Venezuela, but yesterday in a meeting with some people, we've been for 10 years without being able to meet together in person because we're persecuted. And sometimes we are blamed and victimized as a society because we haven't been able to achieve a change because there's no unity. And I want to say that that's not true. We've been able to get united in Venezuela and we have challenged the dictatorship. And that's why we need the support of the international community. And I can tell you today that we can, again, to be unified with the primaries and achieve democracy, but we need support to protect all these people that are there on the field. What steps should the opposition take in case they lose the elections? And what should they do in 2025? We need to prepare for the elections because once again we are in a time of dictatorship, but we need to achieve stability to be able to govern. The executive is not enough. I was in charge for a period of time, but unity is not enough. So we are getting ready to be able to get some agreements with the primaries also. And I'm going to provide a simple example. Whoever gets to the second primaries cannot lose. They have to win. And who comes third, they cannot lose. And during dictatorship, because they are going to be persecuted, the dictatorship is going to try to imprison them, and they're going to try to do the same like Ortega in Nicaragua in 2021. So we are already preparing ourselves for that, for elections, and we understand that whoever wins or participates like I was is going to be subject to persecution. So once again, we can contain with nonviolent protests against the National Guard, but it's going to be difficult because countries like Russia or China that are going to disturb the scenario. So we are ready for that. We're ready, or we're getting ready to prevent that scenario that happened in Nicaragua. And I'm going to repeat this. We are trying to get protection for the ones that are on the field. And this is very tough. And I'm going to talk about myself. It's very difficult to be always persecuted, fake news, and trying to get your family, your relatives, and then we can all do that and ask for protection because we're safe. And right now, I feel safe talking about this here today, unless I see some signs over here against me. But I think it's very important that this message, and I'm asking all of you, not only for empathy about trying to live with $5 for one day, but also to talk about all these people that are trying to challenge and confront Maduro. To be able to get to these elections with the minimal conditions, the regime has to do some concessions or have some concessions like you have mentioned. The elimination of these sanctions is something that is a priority for the regime. This could be a valuable incentive for negotiations, but the sanctions that have been raised, or like what happened with Chevron recently, have not been reciprocated by the regime. So do you think that the oil sector undermines the credibility of the U.S. sanctions regime? I don't want to talk about minimal sanctions or rights. We are fighting for all rights. We know that there's a dictatorship, so we're trying to be able to destroy them. And the sanction system, I think it's a tool. And even in DC, I think they're trying to counter-arrest the sanctions of negotiations. But I think that it's a part or two faces of the same coin. The incentive has been to look for Maduro because he has said, if you raise the sanctions, I'm going to give you free elections. So, of course, this is hurting them. This is hurting the dictatorship, and they are upset and bothered by the sanctions. The corrupt people that have the sanctions around them are bothered by this. So, the sanction to an oil sector is not enough. The only tool that we have right now to confront the regime at an international level could be that at a national level, we need to activate the elections, mobilize, and protect the people that are on the field. So we cannot just see this, and I'm talking about the renewal of the licenses. I think that these actions should happen simultaneously. It's not just one or the other. It's the possibility of an agreement and sanctions and being organized internally and protecting all the people that are on the field. We cannot just have one tool. We need to make Putin and Maduro responsible for all the violations of human rights. We talked a little bit about the armed forces in Venezuela. This is a critical component of the regime's repressive apparatus. At the same time, these are highly factitious force with a multitude of actors and agendas. How can we get them to lean towards democracy and support transition? What do they want as members of the armed forces in exchange of this? First of all, we need to understand that this is an internal force that keeps Maduro there. So this is a very critical component for any transition to stabilize the country and counter-arrest groups that are in Venezuela right now. And second of all, to see them as part of society. A sergeant could be making $12 and $17 per month. So if a teacher makes $5, they make twice or three times more, but obviously it's not enough, and they have the same problem as other Venezuelans. So we need to provide some incentives that are going to benefit all these changes, and it's going to be different from the elite, from that regime that obviously is committed because of the crimes that they have committed, corruption, and United Nations, and the point 121 was mentioned from Michelle Bachelet, and how this feeds all of this. So what we need to do is to make it clear and make those people responsible for their criminal acts, and to be able to achieve transitional justice to facilitate this transition. And that's why election is very important in 2024, and people need to participate. Well, CSIS is the Center of Studying International Topics and Strategies, and I'm going to highlight strategies. So the scenario for a transition to democracy in Venezuela, how can they maintain the control of the territory that are right now occupied by guerrillas, unions, criminal groups that control a very important part of the territory under the protection of Maduro, strengthening the armed forces and the institution. A sergeant that is making $17 or $12 per month versus the presence of ELN or in the south of Venezuela for illegal gold mining are there. So we need to see the armed forces as a component or main pillar of the country. So we need to rescue sovereignty in Venezuela because there are lots of irregular groups and also a presence of foreign groups like Russia and others to extract minerals. And that could be combated against, and we need to do something to be able to protect the armed forces. A sergeant, and I'm going to repeat this again because it's an institution that represents my country, their uniform is not even in good condition. So we need to exercise the power of the state and be able to recover this because it's failing right now, and it's because of Nicolás Maduro. We're going to talk a little bit about the International Criminal Court. Despite the efforts of the regime to create a system that the justice system is functioning in the right way, the International Criminal Court is continuing to investigate crimes against humanity perpetrated by the Maduro regime. So thanks to 8,900 victims, do you think that the investigation of CPI has scared the regime so they don't commit more abuses? Well, this is something that is happening right now by the chain of command and trying to get justice. But of course, what's happening in Venezuela, even if we go to the International Criminal Court, we have failed in the cooperation of the state in perpetrating these crimes, and also the recognition of the killing of Fernando Galvan that was tortured, and Culbeta Cosa Arevalo and youth that protest for the rights on the street. So the best thing that we can do is strengthening this and thank all the victims, because it's very difficult for the victims to be able to tell or provide testimony every time that they have to talk. So we have to recognize the victims, the relatives of the victims, and also the organizations that have been able to achieve everything. But it's the regime is scared, and we want justice. We want reparation, not repetition. And I think that that's very important, to be able to look for different mechanisms so that these dictators are responsible for what they have been doing. So, of course, while this happens, they haven't been able to do anything. There's still people that are in prison in Venezuela, and this keeps happening all the time. Regarding the tools that we have, the human rights, if we could do something against them, we would be at the front of the International Criminal Court. We're not even talking about previous crimes or trying to look for anything else. We're just saying that we need more support from different countries to be able to get better tools. We haven't had enough tools or good tools, because they're just saying that this is happening because there's not unity in our country. So no, we need to look for better tools to protect all these political prisoners, their relatives that have to provide testimony once again how their relatives have been tortured. And I know about this because my uncle was tortured, my team have been tortured, and even that fact we're trying to get to an agreement, trying to get a free election because we know that we don't have lots of tools to be able to recover and rescue democracy and rights in our country. Regarding the International Criminal Court, the time is a long time and they do not respond right away or in a speedy way, expedited way for all the needs of the victims. And maybe the criminal court continues with its work even in a new context if transition happens towards democracy. But with that context, if there is a free democracy in Venezuela, what can the government do regarding all the victims? We need to make them visible. These dictatorships are trying to erase all the struggle of the political prisoners, the indigenous groups. So we need to make them visible and we need to talk about that. And then we need to repair all the damage and all the hurt that they've gone through. We need to repair all of this. We need to repair today to heal all those wounds after being persecuted. And we need to, of course, make sure that this doesn't happen again. We need to separate powers and we need to do many other things. And we need to talk about that today to initiate. We've been talking about transitional justice and how to repair powers. And we are working on that now, even before I started. Well, as Chris mentioned a couple of minutes ago, we are CSIS and we focus a lot on geopolitics. And we're going to talk about other authoritarian countries. The Maduro regime has benefited significantly from its partnerships with fellow authoritarians like in Cuba or Nicaragua, and also in the case of Russia and Iran. How has this autocratic alliance allowed Maduro to hold power, and how can democracies develop a better playbook to counter that currently being used by authoritarians? I'm going to talk about the main pillar, which is the armed forces and the support of regimes like China, Iran, and even Turkey. What was the first element? To help them with sanctions. The sanctions to Russia for the invasion in Ukraine, for example, was more multilateral. And it happened really quickly. And that made it difficult for Russia to utilize other countries to be able to skip the sanctions. And we were talking about sanctions in Venezuela, but the dictatorship was using countries like China or Nicaragua to smuggle gold. So I think that we need to make more efforts and in a multiple way to be able to get more tools and be able to contain all these regimes right now, because Maduro and Putin and Iran is all connected, and it's very naive because they're all connected. And we also have to talk about money laundering, and that doesn't have to do with the formal economy. It's something more complex than that. And I've heard that getting close to a dictator in a nice way, let's say, it would be trying to make him separate from Russia or China and stop the pressure of migration in the region. because it's not only Venezuelans in the US, but also in Colombia and other countries. So we need to try to contain in a multilateral way and to be able to achieve progress. And that can only happen with democracy. One of the most important achievements from your administration was the work that you did establishing a humanitarian fund for the allocation of the regime's frozen assets towards support to the Venezuelan people. Given the ongoing humanitarian situation, what's the future of the humanitarian fund and how can we help the international community to focus on all of this that is happening in Venezuela today? First of all, we need a solution. I think one of the most important things that we've seen in Venezuela and suffering sometimes, also the media has suffered a lot, and I'm going to say it in an honest way. When there's a cause that is trendy, then the media pays more attention and it facilitates the support and everything. But when the issues are multiplied, well, every country has their own issues. So Venezuela cannot be the only problem or the most important thing in the world. And we were talking about this at the Wilson Center. What is that we have to do, the ones that fight for democracy? We need to get solutions that can be supported by the international community. And it's very hard and it's tough because if you do not do it quickly, then the focus goes away. So the humanitarian fund is essential, and I want to thank all the countries that have supported this. And the immigration crisis right now from Venezuela is one of the largest, and it has received only a 10% of funds. And that's why we need to keep insisting on this. We need to create solutions to transfer all these funds. And we're going to continue working on this. The US is recognizing the error of ending the interim government, and we need a license to utilize these funds and then being able to get more funds because they are needed. One of the mistakes that we made within the interim government was to reduce ourselves. We've talked about this. So we need to go and achieve and get more support from other countries. And we also had to sacrifice a little bit. So of course, so we need to maintain this. So it's something very essential to be able to make them visible because this is going to be essential and needed. Until we know what's the humanitarian cause of all of this. So yesterday there was a news that was published that the Department of State had unfrozen the bank accounts from the interim government that right now has only $300 million. What is the opposition doing with the money? There are lots of needs in Venezuela, and we need essential medicine, chemotherapy, mines. The needs in Venezuela are infinite. And I'm going to tell you this again. Nobody leaves their country for pleasure. It's because there's a lot of necessity, persecution, or fear. So I think this is very critical. I haven't checked the numbers. I saw it yesterday in a news portal. And I think that this is not exact. But what can we do? We can help the humanitarian fund. And that's recognizing this regarding the mistake of stopping the interim government from all of this. And the good news here is not only to have license to be able to use these funds, but also for humanitarian fund. But we need to reestablish this interim government. We have talked about the human victims, but there are other victims like the environment in Venezuela and all the crimes against the environment. That should be important for Venezuelans, but not only for them, but for the whole planet in general regarding diversity in Venezuela. Can you please tell me what's happening and regarding mining and what can the international community do? Maybe you talked about blood diamonds, and when we talk about blood gold in Venezuela, and we're gonna just talk about this, and we don't want to compare what happened in Africa, but the consequences are very similar with what's happening in Venezuela. So what we can do is sanctioning this illegal smuggling of gold. They used initially Nicaragua to be able to do money laundering so that the gold was legal. So what's happening in mines is basically a lot of crimes, human trafficking, slavery, destruction of the Amazons, money laundering, trafficking of weapons. So all of these crimes are happening within the illegal mining. So what can we do? Attack the dictatorship so that we can be more responsible with the environment, with the water resources, but specifically we can talk about this and penalize gold, and we can identify this with the illegal use. And this is going to be very complex. When we see the armed forces, they distribute all of this. So we need to know the causes of all this internal persecution. So we need to do something about this. So that it's not only important democracy, but also financing regarding Russia to get minerals and financing through illegal mining. So we need to pay a lot of attention to all of this that is happening regarding illegal mining.
Aquí en Washington esta semana.
Well, you haven't had many meetings in Washington, even in the Capitol, with Republicans and Democrats. What was the message sent?
Relaciones con Maduro.
To not normalize the relationship with Maduro. That's to normalize a dictatorship. We have seen what happens when we approach a dictator in an economic way. We saw it in Russia. We have seen it in Cuba as well. There's lots of criticism and the sanctions regime, etc. It's not that defend one or the other. I defend the tools that we have available to us. The message is to to not normalize a dictatorship because it does not give us any good relationships. It does not have any good economic consequences. It does not normalize geopolitics. What we have to do is potentialize and improve tools to improve democracy. Number two, support those who are uh, resisting on the ground. For example, sanctions that have to do with not renewing a license if the dictators do not allow those elections, starting with observation or international community observers. And we have to align bipartisanship and to align the international community. The interim government was just a recognition, but it was also the recognition of the international community in the face of an innovative tool to improve democracy. So these are the messages that we have been consistently sending to the different institutions. And we want to continue to do it in the different countries. Let's imagine for a second, what if we're able to protect those who are on the ground? What if we can establish the correct incentives, the dates of presidential election?
Si algo necesita
To do
hoy la
that,
democracia,
then we can make strides. So democracy cannot just be compliant.
hoy la
We cannot approach a dictator in a diplomatic way. But immigrants need stability in the region.
una ventana de
And
oportunidad.
that would be a window of opportunity and a successful, an example of success. There was a young man from San Cristobal yesterday who asked, who was skeptical. We have gone through a lot in Venezuela. We have done a little bit of everything in Venezuela. We have tried it all. Okay, we have
Miles de
protested thousands of times at our great risk. We have united to the opposition. We have made innovations with an unprecedented government. We have won elections. They have been taken away from us. We have delegitimized the government. So every tool has to be seen. Like, we have not seen the objectives, but we have weakened a regime and we have to take advantage of them. So I understand that Carlos from Cristobal is skeptical, but not the first powers of the world.
democracia que podemos.
You have to understand, you have to believe that we can recover democracy and we can support people who are going through a crisis. I believe that we can have, better security. I think that will turn the situation
¿Qué
for
piensa Maduro?
Nicaragua, Uganda. What does Maduro do? He jails the oppositions leaders, and nothing happens. It's to no consequence. So what can we do? We have to reverse those incentives. We have been resisting on the ground at all risks. And that's why I'm asking for urgent protection. We are looking for the right incentive to be able to contain and stop a dictator. We are asking for things not to be normalized and for no citizen to get used to this situation, to this dictatorship. We want elections, an elections date, and the presence of the opposition leadership. And we need to take the right steps for negotiations. So those practices, repression that has no response, a solid response from the international community, they're not examples only amongst dictators to continue repressing the people, but they are examples for those who want to be dictators. Yes, those who have that latent, potential or desire. Yes, and there are countries with definitely with weak democracies, to not call them something else.
Está ahí.
yeah, that populist democracy exists. And like I have been saying it for a long time, and democracy is always at risk. We cannot just take it for granted. Just like you cannot take for granted hugging your family, how you love them. Sometimes we do take that for granted, and one day they're not no longer there. So Venezuelans in Venezuela, we took democracy for granted. We left it at the hands of third parties and fourth parties, and everyone
Los derechos.
everyone has a duty and rights to defend.
Digo profundo
Rights
en
are
esta.
not begged for; they are to be defended. We have to recover democracy. In order to recover it, we have to defend it. So in our countries in Latin America that have um, institutional frailty, we have to strengthen uh, the press, NGOs. We have to give voice
Es
to those
decir,
who have no voice, the victims. I mean, we can do a lot, and we still have time. Many people
no llegamos a tiempo y lo digo con dolor.
think that we didn't make it on time, and this hurts. Friends like people, Cecita, we didn't get there on time, but there is still time for millions of Venezuelans who want to go back and want to see their country flourish. And we all have, that little grain of sand to contribute. Very quickly, I want to talk about the electoral issue. You just mentioned that there is no freedom of press or that it needs to be strengthened. And before this meeting, we were talking about this in the waiting room. You were commenting on the apparatus of massive misinformation that the Maduro regime deploys. And since there is no freedom of press and an environment of being able to spread ideas, how can the opposition diffuse precisely their message towards the electorate at a very high personal cost because it's through actions? When we say that in Venezuela nothing is going on, is because we have not seen millions protesting on the streets because it's the only way that we can communicate and the only way to be seen. So it is a paradox that has to be resolved quickly. The misinformation apparatus is brutal. It is based on the Russian apparatus and what RTE, Sputnik, and they have a repeater and telesur that is controlled by Maduro. It's a multi-channel misinformation apparatus. Uh, some social media validates it, and the citizens get confused when they see that there's a check repeating fake news. That's validation of fake news. And what we have to do as citizens, go back to the 50s, a piece of paper, a demonstration, an assembly, mouth to mouth, posters. The main way to communicate in Venezuela is social media, but our main action is whatever we communicate. So it's very hard to see us on the ground because we're only visible when we are tortured or when there are millions of us on the streets or when an opposition leader is incarcerated. It's very difficult to communicate that. That's why the tools, freedom of press, and other tools that we have to communicate sometimes informational cycles that are natural to any means of communication in a country actually paradoxically go against democracy as such. So we have to find a way to contain this. There's a world debate regarding fake news, regarding um, AI. If you added 11 countries like uh, Venezuela and Nicaragua,
Famoso blue check de Twitter, seguramente.
I read a lot about the blue check from Twitter. We all entered in the debate beyond the economic issue and how much does it cost.
Es un maestro o un profesor.
We have a professor, a teacher who makes $5 a month. You have the validation of misinformation because that famous blue check generated a halo of veracity,
O sea, imagínate
right? Imagine this in the hands of bots or trolls, some call them,
Para generar
that are not
mayor
connected directly to AI. So imagine how this affects the perception of reality, and even in Venezuela, because uh, they just distort the fact that I don't have any money for antibiotics, medicines, food, clothing. But when we see it from the point of vision of security of this city, it distorts the situation. So that uh, challenge that you presented uh, needs to add another chapter on how to do it, because what the media did was repress the demonstration of professors and teachers, etc. The only way to make news. Those are the tools that we have. We have to improve those tools. We have to accelerate it, and I'll talk about the blue check later on. So the issues that we have discussed today, Mr. President, are still open, and there are no easy solutions. Yeah, like just like you mentioned. But there are solutions. Yes, there are solutions, but they are not easy to achieve. But I think that we are leaving this meeting with the desire to keep fighting for democracy in Venezuela. And we wanted to thank you not only for your presence today, for sharing your comments with us today, but for your courage, your valor, and the sacrifices that you and your team are making for a prosperous Venezuela and democratic Venezuela. Thank you so much.